นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Tonight we've come together on the occasion of Visakha Puja or Vesak. It's the full moon in the month of May, when we recollect the birth, the enlightenment, Parinirvana of the Buddha. Our teacher. So it's a day of great gratitude and appreciation, I think, from most people who have faith in the Buddha and his teachings. There's also an opportunity to really think more deeply about the Buddha and his teachings, what they mean to you personally, each one of us. One way Ajahn Kalyano used to talk about the Buddha, say, well, there's the Buddha on the outside, the historical Buddha, the person. So we have the history books, we have the story of the Buddha from whatever we know, either from the sources in the suttas, the texts, the Vinaya, or from other historical sources. So the Buddha wasn't actually born Buddha, he was born Prince Siddhartha, son of the leader of the Sakyan people. He was born, we say, as a bodhisattva, somebody, a great being who had made the aspiration to become a Buddha many, many lifetimes previously. 16 asankhayas previously. And a sankhaya is an incalculable era of time. So long you can't really work it out. And 16 of those, probably one would do, wouldn't it? But 16, just following the text. This being who became Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, had been practicing to become a Buddha. Now 16 asankhayas, he hadn't yet been confirmed by another living Buddha. Because, again, historically they say, Bodhisattva only becomes destined to become a Buddha when he has been confirmed by a living Buddha. So they say, our Buddha, Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama, he, in the life of Dipankara Buddha, a former Buddha, received confirmation that he would become a Buddha in the future lifetime, known as Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama. So then another 4 asankhayas, incalculable eras, and 100,000 kalpas, which is also a long, long time. For that period of time he was a confirmed bodhisattva, practicing, helping other beings to be free from suffering in whatever way he could, cultivating his knowledge, his skills in meditation, his compassion. And he was driven by compassion. A bodhisattva is a being driven by compassion for all other beings, aiming to help guide them out of suffering. But not just once, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Because the Buddha is so rare. The Buddha is self-enlightened, Sammasambuddha. So one who's destined to become a Buddha has to really do it a lot, practice a lot, do a lot of good. That's why they call it great compassion, because it's such amazing sacrifice of physical and mental energy, happiness, safety, everything for others, for enlightenment. So when Prince Siddhartha was born, he's already at the end of a huge period of Bharami building. So they say when he was born, he uttered the words, I am supreme, the greatest in the world. Maybe hard to imagine these days, a baby speaking as soon as they're born. But if you think about the citta, the consciousness of the bodhisattva that's been trained for so many lifetimes, you can imagine the possibility that the mindfulness of the Prince Siddhartha, the bodhisattva as he was born, was perfect. They say in his mother's womb, he was perfectly mindful, those 9 months in his mother's womb. This is the accumulation of all the Bharami from past lives that he's practiced. So when he's born, he knows who he is and what he's aiming at, enlightenment already. So he takes a step and announces to the world, I am the Supreme. But he wasn't yet a Buddha, so he had to go through his youth and then got married, even had a son, Rahula, before he finally left home to pursue this quest for enlightenment, the end of suffering. And he even went out to see other teachers, the leading teachers in India, and learned exactly what they taught. He was a very good student. It's not like the Buddha didn't know how to learn from others, he did. But he found that those other teachers couldn't show him the way to completely purify his heart from all delusion, attachment, suffering. So he left his teachers and went off to practice further, and it took him 6 years till he had his enlightenment experience under the Bodhi tree on the full moon night in May, all those years ago. So that's the second thing we recollect on Visakha Puja, the effort of the Buddha and we say supreme effort and the completion of his adhitthana, his determination to reach enlightenment for the good of all other beings. And so what he realized that brought him to enlightenment, or we say awakening, was the Four Noble Truths. Completely understood what is suffering, the cause of suffering, craving and attachment, and completely abandoned craving and attachment. And he realized the end of suffering, Nirodha, the cessation of suffering. And he understood exactly what the path that leads to the end of suffering was, the Noble Eightfold Path. So these Four Noble Truths became the basis of what he would later teach for the next 45 years. He was 35 when he was enlightened. For the next 45 years he spent his time walking around India barefoot in the heat, in the dust, eating alms food in a bowl, as a monk, teaching other monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, how to practice and understand these same Four Noble Truths. That was his gift to the world out of great compassion. And we're still benefiting from that today. Better than any other gift, I would say, as we just chanted. Yeah, it's the highest gift. Gift of Dhamma. And we love to receive gifts, material gifts. People give us a present, people give us food, people share with us different things. But the gift of Dhamma outdoes all of those material gifts. Not to belittle them or put them off, but the gift of Dhamma is even more valuable because it shows us the way out of suffering. What could be more valuable to a human than that? So the Buddha spent 45 years teaching that. The moment of his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree was, they say, it's just like a brief flash. Becoming a Buddha, changing from being a Bodhisattva, Prince Siddhartha, to being a Buddha, and a fully awakened, self-enlightened Buddha, that takes place in one instant, one mind moment. The term in Buddhism is Opapatika. It's like an instant realization that completely changes the way the mind is, the way that mind understands truth. It's completely changed in that one moment. Of course, all the preceding moments, all the practice of the Buddha and the Bodhisattva before that led up to that moment, so it's not like some kind of random experience, it just pops up in the mind. It's the result of all the previous practice. But the actual moment that the Buddha is born, as it were, is one instant. So before that moment, he was a Bodhisattva. After that moment, he's a Buddha. There's a change. And it's an unshakable change to his mind. And a non-returning change. It's not going to return to its old way of thinking. So he said, from that moment on, all birth was cut off. The causes for future birth finished. All karma-making activity of the mind finished. Once the Buddha becomes an awakened Buddha, he doesn't make karma anymore. Even though out of compassion he spent 45 years teaching, helping other beings, it wasn't actually to make good karma or to get anything. It was simply out of compassion, because he knew how to help people, he did. Because he was still alive, he could. At the end of those 45 years, he became old like anyone else, because the Buddha still had a human body just like us, even though he was fully enlightened, self-enlightened. He still had a human body subject to aging, sickness, and then death. So after 45 years, at the age of 80, he passed away. So the way we talk about the Buddha passing away is Parinirvana, entering Nibbana. In fact, his mind had already been purified of greed, anger and delusion. It was already in Nibbana, or experiencing Nibbana, as it were. but he was still alive, still having to carry his body around and still teaching. But Parinirvana means death of Buddha, never to be born again. So once the Buddha dies, he doesn't return. He's not gone to some kind of eternal heaven or place up there or wherever that may be. Nibbana is, we say, the unborn, the uncreated, the unconditioned. It's not a place, it's not a realm, it's not a world. And the Buddha had explained there's the sensual realm or sensual world, Kamaloka, which we're part of. We're sensitive beings, we can see and hear and touch. And then there's the Brahma worlds, Brahma realms, and then the Arupa worlds. There are these three worlds that we talk about for beings, but Nibbana is outside of them. So Vesak Puja, it's a time to contemplate, well, what is Nibbana? Because somebody who's reached it doesn't come back. Not born again. Which may not sound that attractive perhaps at first, if you're very attached to this world and your pleasures and the things you like. The thought of not coming back is not so attractive perhaps. But then if you understand that not coming back means no more suffering, maybe that is a goal worth pursuing. So these are the three things we're remembering, recollecting on this full moon in May. The birth, the enlightenment, the Parinirvana. And the important thing is more the birth, the inner birth or the inner arising of the mind of the Buddha, the enlightenment experience. Because that's what he used as a basis for teaching everyone else, us. What's contained in the Buddhist texts, the suttas, the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, and then what we practice, what we chant, what we practice in our meditation, what we listen to in talks, what we learn and practice has all come from that experience of awakening that the Buddha had in his heart. So that's the Buddha on the inside, the inner Buddha. You might say the inner Buddha never dies. Because Nibbana is not only not subject to death, but it's not subject to birth. It means they call Nibbana an element, dhatu, Nibbana dhatu. It's just is what it is, it's just Nibbana. The pure mind, the unconditioned. It's not even the mind, that's another thing. The Buddha was very careful to describe Nibbana, or not to describe the Nibbana wrongly. So it's not a thing. It's not even the mind is Nibbana. But the well-trained mind can reach Nibbana. That's the Buddha on the inside. The mind that is free from suffering, free from attachment, because he had cultivated this Noble Eightfold Path to perfection, to completion. That was the cause for his awakening or his enlightenment. So if you have faith in the Buddha, or it makes sense what the Buddha taught, and you have faith, then you're practicing following the same path, the same method as the Buddha. If you follow the same method, you'll get the same result. As the Buddha once said, talking to a man from Rajgir town, if you meet someone who says, "What's the way to Rajgir?" and you tell them the directions, no GPS in India, but they do do have people would know the route to get to that town. So they say, well, you follow this road, this track, past that tree, that mountain, that landmark, and you'll get to Rajgir. That person has the potential to follow and reach the town of Rajgir. But what if they don't follow the instructions? They go in a different direction, what will happen? And the man says, well, they'll end up somewhere else. They're not going to end up in Rajgir if they don't listen and don't follow. And the Buddha said, well, in the same way, this Noble Eightfold Path, if you follow it, put it into practice, cultivate these qualities, you can also become enlightened like me, reach Nibbana. But if you don't, and you go in a different direction, you reject it, or you listen wrongly, or you follow your own views and opinions maybe, you won't reach Nibbana. You'll reach somewhere else. So anytime we're cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path, dana, sila, bhavana, in our hearts, then that's bringing us closer to the Buddha, to Nibbana, to enlightenment. So this is why we sometimes say, well, when you're practicing this path, you have sila, you're not hurting other people, you have mindfulness, you're seeing the path, you're seeing the impermanent nature of body and mind, then it's as if you're with the Buddha. Then they'll reduce it down, they say, when you have mindfulness, you're with the Buddha. You're knowing, when you know, say, the breath with mindfulness, you're knowing the Buddha. This is the inner Buddha. Obviously the historical Buddha is not here anymore. The person is not here, but the Dhamma that the Buddha realized, the inner Dhamma that he taught and realized for himself, that we can reach, penetrate, so we can know the Buddha in our hearts, anytime that our mind is with the Dhamma. So like when you have a moment of mindfulness, you have right view, you're not hurting anyone, you're practicing in a moral way, then it's like you're with the Buddha then. You're knowing the Buddha. And sometimes it's important to remind ourselves of this, because so often, because we are caught up in the appearance of things, conventional reality, what we call samuti satcha. You know, we say the Buddha, we look at the statue of Buddha, or the book with the Tripitaka, or anything that sort of externally reminds of the Buddha, pictures, chants, anything. We tend to take that as the Buddha. It's just the way the mind works, doesn't it? But actually what we have to go to find the real Buddha, we have to go inwards, cultivate sati, mindfulness, insight, panya. Cultivate this Noble Eightfold Path will bring up the Buddha inside. So tonight we're here to practice some meditation, chant, and in a moment we'll also do a circumambulation with flowers, incense, candlelight, go on a walk around the hall. This is to recollect this Buddha, both the historical Buddha, the person who made all those sacrifices and out of compassion taught the Dhamma, but also maybe making your wish to bring up the inner Buddha, or go to the inner Buddha and cultivate the same qualities in your heart that the Buddha cultivated. The mindfulness, the patience, the effort, the insight into the three characteristics that help bring the mind to see truth. And the Buddha said the best way to show gratitude to the Buddha or remember the Buddha is through this, what we call Patipati Puja. It's Visakha Puja, Patipati Puja. So worshipping or venerating the Buddha through practice. And when we offer flowers, candles, incense to the Buddha, you may do that every day of your life, or occasionally you do that. It's not that the Buddha himself needs anything. The Buddha has reached Nibbana, the Buddha is already enlightened. He doesn't need anything from us. What we're doing now is recognizing what the Buddha symbolizes, this enlightened knowledge and the path of practice that leads to the arising of enlightened knowledge in a human mind. We're giving value, importance to that. But the Buddha statue that we offer the candles, flowers, incense to, it symbolizes these qualities. The statue itself is just bronze. It's an external representation of Buddha and the enlightened knowledge of the Buddha. But still we can do these rituals sometimes because they're just reminding us who our teacher was, what the teacher realized himself and what he taught, the Dhamma. But really we're aiming to develop the same qualities through our practice, so developing mindfulness, effort and then insight. And so tonight we have a chance to do that for all night. If you're up for it, you're willing, we'll practice all night. Because that's how the Buddha practiced. He dedicated everything for enlightenment. He said he wasn't going to rest until he had understood what is the path and practiced it and freed his mind from the causes of suffering. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of investigation of truth. The Buddha said you have to really ask yourself where the causes of suffering are still lingering in your mind. Where you're attached. Ajahn Chah used to say, where you're attached is where you'll suffer. What's still left in your mind, in your heart, that you're attached to. Sometimes it's more in the way of material comforts, wealth. Just got to get a little bit more money or property before I'll settle down and then I'll start practicing. We often think like that. Or maybe it's a person. I've just got to sort out my parents or my partner or my kids or my friend. Once they're sorted out, then I'll practice. But this is where our suffering comes from, isn't it? Attachment to people, property, sometimes ideals. I have to fix all the problems of the world and then I'll practice. Once I've finished with all the problems of the world, then I'll be ready to follow the Buddha. Of course, that day will never come. Too many problems, it's endless. So we have to look and ask questions, where am I still attached? Because that's where you're generating suffering for yourself. And the Buddha encouraged us to look, to observe, ask questions, investigate, until you fully understand your own mind, your own heart. Where is this suffering coming from? And then letting it go. And that's why we teach about letting go. Letting go of the causes of suffering: greed, anger, delusion, jealousy, fear, anxiety and worry. The whole lot has to be investigated, understood as a cause of suffering, and then abandoned, let go of. So this is Visakha Puja. We're dedicating our efforts to that practice. I'll finish the talk there, and in a moment we'll be doing our circumambulation around the hall.